To say I finally played Warframe may seem inaccurate when following up my experience in it years ago, when the beta launched and I failed to see much beyond potential. With environments as barren as the plot, controls made for MIT graduates, and firearms having the impact of laser tag, it was a product of the unfortunate position its developer had been in, strapped for cash and on the verge of collapse. Given time to steadily grow and release on consoles, it proved difficult for some, me included, to shake its reputation as a little game that almost could. But thanks to the following that helped make it a success, it's now the game that absolutely can. Worlds are achingly beautiful with vivid lighting and colors whether you're on Earth, Uranus, or anywhere else in our solar system. Weapons ooze satisfaction with booming shotgun blasts pinning enemies to walls with an arrow, or diving stories high. And movements evolve from clunky to the smoothest I've ever experienced. Digital Extremes didn't skip out in animation, utilizing the mixture of motion capture and handcrafting the industry's made a standard. The difference is that actions and their animations layer themselves. Rolling, aiming, and jumping aren't isolated. You can roll whether you're on the floor, in the air, or aiming down sights. Unlike most games where either for balance or believability, it's one action at a time. Not only does this live up to the fantasy of being a space ninja, it elevates a banal combat system into one so visceral, it's hard not to be enraptured. I failed missions in this game due to being so enthralled by the flow of combat, I forgot to complete my objective. That flow stems from the layers previously mentioned. They're not only found within the movement system, but seem to be an intent the entire experience is built around. The methods of which you can maneuver aren't only linked to each other, they're also connected to your firearms, sidearms, melee weapons, and powers. This is what allows you to chain together a sliding shotgun blast to a spin attack, bullet jump, and slam so efficiently. Everything is just a click away, and there's nothing to prohibit the player from doing exactly what their instinct desires. It's needless to say then that any impressions of Warframe from its launch are irrelevant to the current product. It's why I could say I finally played it. But what I couldn't say until recently was that I understood Warframe. Venturing into this space romp today is akin to a first day in college. You don't know what's going on, what or where anything is, or who's important, only that you feel as if you're expected to know. There's one thing Warframe definitely avoids, and that's holding the player's hand explicitly. Beyond its opening missions, the game leaves you entirely to your own devices. Tutorials can be called upon, but they consist of writing that'll remind anyone of a textbook. Early on, it's easy to think, why don't Digital Extremes explain its multitude of systems? And the answer is because multitude is putting things lightly. You'd have to explain frames, primary weapons, secondary weapons, melee weapons, gear, emotes, appearances, upgrades, mods, drains, polarity, fusion, aura, stances, exulis, sentinels, arcwing, riven, endo, Iatan stars, sculptures, specters, primes, ciphers, materials, relics, arena, fishing. Yes, really. Alerts, invasions, events, mastery, levels, sigils, conclave, codex, syndicates, blueprints, bounties, oricans, sorties, nightmares, junctions, relays. And I'm probably missing something.
Actually, you're forgetting raids, mining, corruption, Glenaro, Barrow, Kuva, Kavats, Kubros, Index, and Vaults. Come on, man, unsubscribe.
There's a lot in Warframe, and it's easy to see all of this and believe you've already had enough of the SATs and move on. But, as someone with less than a favorable impression of this game at first, it's not as complicated as it seems. Warframe is an action game, but it shares many elements with RPGs, the most notable of which is the game's willingness to let you play in a manner that'll make you hate it. This isn't a traditional free-to-play or action title that bombards newcomers with tutorials or systems so simplistic a child can understand them. Warframe isn't a game that comes to you, you go to it. And knowing that up front is going to save you from much of the hassle. Assumptions from apathy will only prove one's ignorance here. Opening the arsenal in a first playthrough and seeing the plethora of Warframes asking to be bought is seemingly in the bounds of a greedy and manipulative scam. What's unknown is that credits are relatively easy to earn, and every frame's blueprint can be bought for cheap or earned at a quest. Entering a level 20 mission with level 18 gear and being crushed doesn't seem logical. What's unknown is that leveling weapons and gear isn't connected to the levels of your enemies, the latter of which are a measure of difficulty. 1 through 20 is easy, 20 to 40 is medium, 40 to 60 is hard, 60 to 80 is extreme, 80 to 100 plus is psychotic. And while leveling up your gear is very important, the mods you attach to them are more so. At first glance, mods just seem like traditional upgrades, something you slap on gear for a meager bonus. What's unknown is that mods can be upgraded to the point of insanity with Endo, a resource more difficult and valuable than credits, and a single mod can be the distinction between a good weapon and a great weapon. This is the pattern of Warframe, and one that you grow to accept and expect once you've crawled through the muddy trenches. And what I hope with this video is to help people out of that dirt along the way, because there is an exceptional game here, and for better and worse, it'll leave you to find it. It also won't make information that's most relevant to you overt. Upon starting a new account on PS4, the first tip given to me was about Argon Crystals, a resource used for crafting mid to high tier items in the game, and are traditionally farmed for in the Void, a part of the system players won't visit for at least a dozen hours. And in that first level, you'll have to make the decision between 3 frames along with 2 primary, secondaries, and melee weapons. Unfortunately, the choice in primaries are the world's most generic assault rifle and a bow and arrow that sends enemies flying off cliffs. Don't attach yourself to this thing. Purchase this shotgun for a low sum of credits. It'll serve you well with its hefty damage and powerful response to mods that'll make it useful dozens of hours later. That's not to say automatics don't have a place in Warframe. They do. It's just that with the Bratton and Bolter, they encourage one to ADS and hold down the mouse button, whereas shotguns allow for players to charge into the fray, utilizing the movement system that makes this game so unique. Using parkour also incentivizes new players to make the most of their Warframe's abilities. Because the earliest missions are easy to the point of being more difficult to fail than succeed, it can imprint a bad habit of relying entirely on weapons, when for multiple frames, their abilities are a key factor in success, from the everlasting Nidus to the sneaky Avara. It's also key to give yourself a tangible goal in the early stages, as it's very easy to meander around planets without making progress towards something you want. The easiest is Rhino, and it's best to test your luck early on, because the following is one of the weakest aspects about Warframe. Earning what the game is named after very frequently requires you to participate in boss fights, where missions conclude in earning a component for a frame. The problem is that what components you earn is entirely based on chance, and in my case, Rhino took over 15 attempts before having each of the parts to craft him. More recent frames are attached to quests with components linked to objectives within them. It's a step in the right direction, but some, such as Octavia, require puzzles that spawn out of the player's control, which is even worse. And it doesn't account for earlier frames. There's also the catch-22 of bosses, which aren't easy to farm but fun and engaging to fight, with multiple phases, projectiles, puzzles, and teamwork. In the context of gameplay, it's one of Warframe's highlights. In the context of being an elaborate slot machine lover, it'll make anyone want to carpet bomb Ontario. Being someone that detests boss fights only fought for rewards, I wish that bosses would drop a blueprint with 3 variants of the fight that each drop a specific part. Give them challenges similar to the nightmares, such as completing the boss in a certain amount of time or without using a primary weapon. But that'd leave not only 3 different fights for the team to create, it'd also create dozens of lobbies that people would actively be searching for. And farming is a part of what some people enjoy about Warframe and games like it. The excitement of not knowing when what they're after is going to come. The best compromise I can think of then is after defeating a boss, you unlock the ability to instantly skip to their arena for farming, and effectively making these missions reflect the junctions that don't require navigating a tile set or extraction. It's nice to have build up to a boss, but after that first encounter, no one, and I mean no one, pays attention after that. If people ignore everything generated to get to the fight, why generate it in the first place? But while the process of earning frames might not be satisfying, using them is another story. Moving from Excalibur to Rhino isn't too drastic, but Avara, Frost, or Nidus is a different matter. Though a subtle move in the beginning is good, because all the player needs to be concerned with is powering up the frame, whereas those with unique playstyles need to also be learned mechanically. It's not instinctive to spam your first ability with Nidus, especially when taking part in missions that don't suit his increasing power. But getting the hang of it and feeling nigh unstoppable in endless modes like survival is some of the most fun in this game. Frames require experimentation with mission types, weapons, mods, and playstyles, and it's best to dedicate to this experimentation at times, because rushing through planets with a new frame without understanding its use can lead to frustrating encounters. As said, the game isn't going to stop you from creating a personal hell, even if it seemingly encourages it on occasion. I understand the appeal of defense for farmers or mindless shooting, but as levels to be completed for achieving progress or rewards, it's Ambien rather than AMP. Solo interception is the absolute worst due to the 4 objectives making it impossible for there to be a consistent battle zone, meaning that enemies endlessly pursue you jumping between capture points, or they just stand around waiting to be stabbed. The enjoyment of a planet really depends on the set of missions and their junctions requirements, with Uranus being the most obnoxious, forcing the completion of underwater levels while treasure hunting and waiting for creatures to spawn at random in order to initiate a quest. The best mission types are going to come down to preference of playstyle, but survival and spy were personally the most fun. the former for blasting Lunatic Khan to consistent death, and the latter for taking in the environment and adding tension to movement, rather than the usual free-form flying. There's also how mission types combine with enemies. Currently, there's 3 major factions, the Infested, Corpus, and Grineer, taking the roles of zombies, tech, and military. Not only do the distinct archetypes translate into a notable variety in missions, the factions themselves have dozens of infantry types. The Grineer have specialized corps that layer on top of its mixture of light, medium, and heavy troops, with their military background leading to the use of traps and deployable cover. The Corpus's talent of salvaging technology facilitates not only troops on foot, but bipedal walkers, drones, and security systems. The Infested might be the most appealing, with a combination of both factions that have a unique twist. They rely not on firearms or security, but overwhelming packs of infected Corpus crewmen and even robotics. Unlike the Flood and Halo, you can't just shotgun your problems away. You need to keep moving, knowing when to charge into the fray with lightning-fused katana in hand, and when to take down targets at range. The Corpus are just as engaging with their energy-based weaponry using readable projectiles that make desperate escapes particularly enjoyable, as you survive by your inputs. But Warframe is ultimately a stat-based game, with your success being most dependent on your equipment rather than your skill. And this is most evident with the Grineer, whose hit-scan weaponry doesn't share the Corpus's feedback. Whether their shots land or not seems to be based off of percentages that, with enough enemies on screen, guarantee you'll be shot. It's possible that removing the Grineer's hit-scan weaponry could make them play too similarly to the Corpus, though I believe there's enough depth between military tactics and technology to separate the two. And the Grineer's damage can prevent the game's strengths from being on display. Regardless, it's ultimately a net benefit for there to be 3 factions in the game, as combined with the 19 mission types, they give the game a surprising amount of variety considering its roots as a dungeon crawler in space. When people discuss Warframe in relation to other AAA titles rather than free-to-play, this is what I believe they're referring to: the amount of content, the diversity of it, and more recently, the ambition of it. Quests aren't new in Warframe, but the game's production of them relatively is, utilizing cinematography, music, writing, and voice acting that's of a surprisingly high bar, deep into the experience, rather than dumping resources exclusively into the opening. At times, it suffers from the constraints of Titanfall's campaign, where the story feels disconnected from the action, and its revelations won't have the impact on newcomers that they did for those who played since launch. But the importance of quests like Second Dream, War Within, or Octavia's Anthem is when they show the world of Warframe. I admit to ignorantly writing off this game's universe at first glance with the abundance of hideous creatures that just exist to whine upon cleaving their faces off. But there's a rich and illustrious universe to sink your teeth into here. The Corpus, Grineer, and Infested are more than their archetypes. The Grineer's background isn't the simplistic writings of a lootathon action game, but a tangible and tragic tale of clones born genetically defective whose conditions worsen with each passing generation, and is compensated with in heavier usage of crude cybernetics and augmentations. The Corpus aren't engineers with anger management issues, but a full-blown merchant cult, salvaging as many things as they sell, and outright greedy for the technology of your faction and their forerunners. Even the Infested had the unexpected twist of being created by said forerunners, rather than your enemies, giving the weight of dramatic irony to the proceedings. But all of this, the factions, leaders, and key players in this world, are in the background until these cinematic quests, and that's the best thing that comes from them, sparking interest in Warframe's universe, even in those who didn't give a damn when just looting and leveling. The downside is due to Warframe's roots. Large chunks of these cinematic quests are quite heavy on telling over showing, and the ways they connect to gameplay aren't the most successful, with set pieces that restrict your movements or make the player invulnerable. But just the effort is admirable and indicative of where Digital Extremes plan to take their humble project. One of its most recent and substantial updates, Plains of Eidolon, invited the most obvious comparisons to other titles, creating an open world for the player to explore on Earth. But as with everything else in Warframe, it's just another cog in this enormous machine, with its own set of activities, progression, and unlocks. The most intriguing aspect of Eidolon for me, though, is its pacing. Warframe is a stop-and-start experience. It's navigating a playlist rather than a concept album. But entering the plains is much more seamless. You collect a bounty, step through the gates, and travel to your heart's content. It boldens the entrancing nature of Warframe. To a viewer, this action may look intense, chaotic, stressful even, but that's in its presentation. In gameplay and your control, the flow of movement and combat is oddly cathartic. After finally coming to understand Warframe, it's taken place as the ideal go-to action game. I might adore Rainbow Six Siege, but as my go-to for the past few years, it is not something to rely on for release, being just as likely to punch you in the face as caress it. Warframe was similarly frustrating in the hours I couldn't see its artistry. But now, It's something that even while writing the script, I want to go back to over and over again. The reason I didn't bother changing my account name for so long is because I didn't know if this game would be something I'd ever come back to. But after the time spent with it, I feel confident that I'll remain in its world.
Welcome to Q&A, where I respond to your idiocy. What would your fursona be? Mr. Lucas is a very honest, insightful, and yet very passionate individual. Based on that, I think he would love to be a hedgehog. Have you ever played Darkest Dungeon? I did. It is a travesty, a blundering mountain of hatred and rage. That game can get fucked. When is Dwarf Fortress 26 years later? Oh good, you managed to find a game that is even more annoying than the Darkest Dungeon. Losing is fun, my ass. Nobody likes to see their time and effort being thrown to waste. Just ask your disappointed parents. What is love?
Love is a weakness.
Who would you rather have be your new father, Alex Jones or Review Bra? Review Bra for sure. Conspiracy theories are for scum. Except the one about the aliens. What is your smoothest pickup line? I have a really good one. Check it out. Hey girl, are you because damn. Pineapple pizza? No. Pea and mayonnaise pizza? Fuck yes. What's a song cover that's as good, or better, than the original? Look What You Made Me Do, by Jax Films. What are your thoughts on midgets? Should we kick them? I don't think I would kick a little person, but I would definitely kick the author of this question right into his little dick. Why do I feel Warframe years later, Ray? I have no idea.